Welcome, grasshoppers. Thanks to this gift from MD Knight Zero, among others, we're continuing our 1.e4 Repertoire series, which is the purpose of studying Bobby Fischer. He had a relatively solid and strategic approach using 1.e4, and he rarely varied until ultimately in the World Chess Championship in Game 6, he actually began with the move c4. He did dabble with other moves in exhibition games, such as 1b3 against Miag Murison, but needless to say, he invariably did play the move e4, as he did in Game 3 of this match. Now, he is 4-0 against Fischer-Larsen in this candidate's final match, held in Denver in 1971, ironically the place where I was born. And Fischer-Larsen actually plays the Classical Sicilian one more time, and he doesn't necessarily have an improvement on his previous play, but in this particular position after bishop to e3, I mentioned in the previous video that Fischer had essayed the Vila-Mirovic attack, followed by castling queenside and playing g4, g5. But as I also had an unfortunate experience of this, I also like the solidity of playing a very natural castling move. Now, black can play a6 here, or he can play as Fischer-Larsen did with bishop to d7. And Boris Spassky also preferred this in his match against Fischer in Game 4 of the 1972 match. After the move f4, Fischer-Larsen once again essays the move queen to c8 instead of the more highly respected knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and b5. Or perhaps even bishop to c6, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. So with the move queen to c8, Fischer is getting in f5 a little later than he did in the previous game, because in the previous game he refrained from castling up until the last moment. And after knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, e takes f5, Fischer, rather in a carefree manner, decides to sacrifice this pawn on the e4 square in order to centralize his knight. And part of this could be from the fact that he was so far ahead in the match, he did not mind if he had to draw. But at the same time, he had an uncompromising attitude toward playing for the win, and he certainly was in his element. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain by playing in this manner, so that after knight takes e4, queen takes e4, bishop to e6, Larsen goes for a rather impaired pawn structure. After all, bishop takes, queen takes, queen takes. But this isolated pawn on d6 may tell, even if he doesn't trade queens. Probably after bishop takes e6, queen takes e6. White might continue with rook on a to e1. The queen is unable to capture the pawn on a2 due to the hanging bishop on e7. So we'll see that white has all the space in the world, and even though he's down a pawn, there's a very weak pawn on d6, which could be considered, you know, not just as Achilles' heel, but a cramping influence on the bishop on e7. So if he wants to get all of his pieces out, he may need to sacrifice it. Fischer in this particular position chooses a rather mature positional move, and we're going to go with some candidate moves for white. Remember, once again, by looking for several candidates in the position, we're going to open our eyes to the possibilities available to us. And all of the moves here, in fact, there are at least three. This position is roughly equal despite the pawn disadvantage. All that's needed is the requisite amount of piece activity. And he has a particular plan in mind as well when he essays this move. If you're watching this on video at a later date in YouTube, this is also a chance for you to pause the video and write down several moves, perhaps even circling the best move that you think would be the case, and you could even perform a little bit of a game with that, trying to match wits with Bobby Fischer. And here we are. Fischer, besides the fact that he could simply double rooks with rook to f2, or retreat his queen to put pressure on the a7 pawn, thereby avoiding any loss of time with the move d5. However, Fischer chooses a much more aggressive plan of a rook lift, not just to f2, but to f3. And we'll see the purpose behind this in just a moment as Larsen offers him the trade of queens. Fischer backs up his queen. He's not at all concerned about the trade of queens, even though he is down a pawn. And in this particular position, follows through with his idea after the move d5. Once again, we are looking for candidate moves for white. This will give you an opportunity to find moves that are better than average in the position. After all, black is about to achieve a certain advantage in some respects. If he returns the pawn, he's offering the return of the pawn now. All Larsen really needs is a chance to be on the scoreboard in this match. So aside from the fact that he can just capture the pawn back and attempt to recover his material on e7, he has to deal with the threat of the bishop on d5 to both rooks. Therefore, rather than just retreating the rook to e1, Fischer throws in a rather lovely in-between move that would be devastating to black should he allow rook takes g7. This is a much greater threat than the 5 points that he would lose on this square. After all, not only would we be capturing on g7, but we would be moving across the rank with a discovered check in a mill-type fashion, checking and perhaps even recovering more material in a different way. The bishop would also be unprotected here in this particular case. Let's just look at how that might transpire. After the move d takes e4, rook takes g7, king to h8, rook takes f7 check, king to g8, rook to g7 check, rook takes e7 check, king to g8, rook to g7 check. Mate is relatively unavoidable with any retreat of the rook. He, on the other hand, has the opportunity to give back this this rook, and it would be rather fatal in this sense as well, because he wouldn't be able to avoid further checks and, of course, the threat of mate on the back rank. Devastating given the fact that he did not get his rook on a8 activated at all. Therefore, rather than allowing that to happen, after the move rook to g3, which protects the rook on e4 from the capture by the pawn on d5, Larsen has to play a rather passive move, and he chooses g6. And it's at this moment, without any threats to the rooks on the diagonal, that Fischer returns or gets his material back. However, instead of just simply recapturing, Larsen tries to get just a little bit too fancy, and he actually tries to save his bishop by keeping up the pressure on the two rooks. This is another opportunity for Fischer to show his positional prowess.
Welcome back, John. Glad to see you got away from the puzzle addiction.
Yes, I haven't amended the YouTube video title to include the puzzle streak, but I will when I get a chance after this stream. But I'm happy that we at least reached nearly 60 puzzle streaks problem solved without error, even though I moved too quickly in that last one, and we probably could have broken our high of 75. However, here we're looking for 3 candidate moves for white. And for those of you who are not subscribed on Twitch, you also have the opportunity to contribute in the comments on YouTube, and they will be read here. I will read them out loud. I would in fact like a subscriber to chat on YouTube to be certain that the TTS does work as well as it should. Now in this game, Fischer had already sacrificed a pawn, showing his maturity of being able to give up material.
RxE6, RxG6.
Indeed. I'm not quite so sure about rook takes g6. That doesn't seem, after 8 takes g6, rook to h4, to be the best course of action. He is getting the bishop on e6 in that case. Let's take a look at that. Erikito's suggestion here of going for the mate on h8. It does force the return of some material. But this could well be in black's favor after all. He does have an exchange, and he does have a safer king than he does in the game continuation. So after bishop to d6, which puts pressure on the rook, Erikito's other suggestion, rook takes e6, is what Fischer played, and Larsen is forced to a great extent into playing his into taking the exchange, and Fischer grabs the 7th rank. Now he's going to get yet another pawn for his exchange, and even though he only has 1 pawn for the exchange in total, he has 3 pawns to 1 on this side of the board. So bishop takes d6, rook takes b7. Larsen goes for as much activity as he possibly can get, although the move a5 might have put up better resistance. Rook to c8. Don't blame him. After all, the stronger player has already gotten his rooks to the better squares faster. We'll throw that one in there just in case anyone hasn't heard it before. Basically, the rooks need to be placed purposefully in order to maximize all the pieces' potential for the most part. Got a tremendous amount of pressure already on f7. The rook on f8 is tied down by the bishop. This light squared bishop is, of course, the rock in the position at the moment. And Fischer doesn't hesitate to anchor that bishop with the help of the c2 pawn. At long last, Larsen saves his pawn by playing a5, and Fischer immediately goes after it with it. Rook to a7, and the move bishop c7 is twofold. Not only does it guard the pawn on a5, but it also cuts off some of the pressure by the rook and the bishop on f7. Now, Fischer's move g3 here may or may not be wholly necessary. After all, that pawn is not moving, and we probably can get all of our pawns going with the move a3, followed by a subsequent later b4. Or Fischer could easily start stepping into the center on the color of the squares, not like the opponent's bishop for the most part. After all, black might be threatening rook to d8 and putting pressure on both of these bishops to keep the c pawn from moving. So, needless to say, Fischer plays a rather lackadaisical move g3, but it doesn't diminish his advantage in much in any way, shape, or form, as after black is at least able to try to centralize his rook. Fischer now plays the move rook f1 to keep the rook out, restricting the rook from reaching any of the squares on the 7th or 8th rank away from the rook. And then Larsen finds another less than best move. In this particular position, possibly h5 is the move, but he chooses rook to e7, which unfortunately constitutes a bit of a pin on the bishop on c7, which Fischer does not hesitate to try to exploit. Fischer bothers the rook with bishop f6, keeping the dark square g7 under control. And while Larsen is desperately seeking some form of activity, getting around to the pawn structure that we mentioned before, this is a rather cheesy attempt by Fischer to win a pawn. And as it turns out, Larsen tries to set a trap where if Fischer were to go for it, further exchanges of pieces and the crippling of white's queenside pawns could be in order. However, we aren't just going to look for white's candidate moves in this position. One more time we're going to match with Bobby Fischer and try to find what it is about this position that he hopes to accomplish. Not unlike the first game of the match, where Fischer obtains the 2 bishops and escorts the pawns on the outside of the board, this game does result in something very, very similar. So the 2 bishops are a valuable tool for Fischer. Much stronger than a rook in this particular position anyway. It's our favorite time of year, full of love and happiness around us and good cheer. Celebration everywhere. Now, several moves still keep the small advantage for white. One move above the others leads to a tremendous plus.
BXE5 RxG6.
Yeah, rook takes g6 is far from being one of the best moves. We'll look at that in just a moment. But the 2 moves that appealed to me most might be bishop takes a5 or king f2 if I were to play a move that Fischer did not play. The problem with king f2 is that Larsen will return the exchange and keep his a5 pawn anchored and try to keep the pawn on c4 stymied. So Fischer in actuality plays the idea bishop to d2, and the rook really doesn't have any squares. So the only square available to the rook at the moment is d3. But let's look at rook takes g6 for a moment in this position. After all, the rook is attacked by a pawn, and we do have to deal with it. It's not too late for white to play a move like bishop to d2 though, but at the same time, retreating the rook to a6 could well be his best course of action, and now he loses almost all of his ability on this side of the board, and he might even be tied down to that h2 pawn with the help of his king. So it's unfortunate that we're going to have to be stuck guarding this pawn in this fashion. In fact, that pawn structure that we looked at with the pawns on this allowed black's king to come toward the center and hold the base of the pawn structure on the king side.
Doesn't he work?
Well, of course, rook takes a5, but after the move rook c7, remember we're down in exchange and we don't really have a way of moving these pawns as easily. We'll be happy if we're equal in this position, and rook takes g6 threw away our advantage to a certain extent because we don't have the mobile trio of pawns that Fischer keeps in the game. Going back to where we were with the move bishop to e5, bishop to d2, the rook moving, is attempting to save his rook, and now This would be a great study in what can Larsen do to return the favor here. After all, the rook has no squares. He's losing back the exchange. He has to choose how best to give it up. Moves that come to mind are rook on d takes c4, with the idea of checking and skewering.
RCX-C4.
We get his material back. But as it turns out, the move that he did play in the game was rook on c takes c4, which is far from the best. The best move actually was probably just simply to centralize his king, as we talked about, since he has the right pawn structure, and have the bishops opposite colors as a reserve option to try to draw this game. Certainly the rook is going to have to cover the second rank as well, but this bishop on d4 will also keep the white rook out of a7 and further counterplay on the f7 square as well. Certainly rook takes a5 could be played, but as it turns out, in this particular game, after bishop c3, rook on c takes c4, bishop takes c4, rook takes c4. He's hoping to use yet another tactical threat to preserve his material by working on e4, capturing on e5, and thus protecting the pawn on a5. However, Fischer throws in yet another in-between move with king to d3, and after rook c5 is able to scarf another pawn. And now we have, as we talked about before, the pass to a pawn to decoy the bishop. And it's a little late, but better late than never, as black centralizes his king, and Fischer seeks to get his king toward the center while exchanging bishops. And as a model example of this, we can already tell that Fischer is invading, and with the power of the outside passed pawn, he has decoyed black's king from this endgame. And there's literally no stopping what's about to happen next. And at this moment, Larsen realized it wasn't worth continuing yet again. And Fischer goes up 5-0 in the match. Devastating result. I'm also hoping to cover his match with Petrosian and his match with Taimanov, as I have the book by Mark Taimanov. I was a victim of Bobby Fischer, and he also recounts his previous encounters with Fischer in that book. And his career was nearly destroyed by Fischer's devastation. Indeed. Thank you, Erikito, for being here. I know it's very early for you, but very late for me. I don't know that I'm going to do another stream tonight. We've done 5 streams today. Crazy. 5 streams today, 3 instructional streams, 1 under 2,000 bullet arena for an hour, plus Puzzle Street, and our usual Jesse February. Happy birthday, Jesse February, here on the 28th of January. She is a great streamer from South Africa, and I'm happy to bring attention to the stronger players that deserve it. In any event, let's roll the credits, and we will call it a day until tomorrow morning, when on weekends I run rapid and sometimes classical events, and occasionally simuls with viewers.
Erikido said, GN.
Good night, Eric. There was a tournament at the Q Bar tonight, hosted by the Q Bar, run by my friend Matt Vergara, who's very close to a professional strength player. However, my wife took some things back to my daughter Jessica at college, and I did not have a car. So in a separate benefit, which is more than a blessing. I'm able to do some of these instructional streams. Thank you, everyone. We have not the usual crew, but we will raid Alexandra Semikanova. A lovely streamer from Kyrgyzstan. Please enjoy her stream for the rest of the evening. She is always playing against viewers and the like. She may even run an arena or two. Cheers and ciao. Good night, Eric.